So I would like to talk to you about cultural appropriation, but first, if you don't mind, for 2 minutes, I would like to take you back to 1960s, when actually the Afro-Caribbean psychiatrist, philosopher, and revolutionary Frantz Fanon actually did write about cultural appropriation even back in 1960s. So in his work, Frantz Fanon points out that colonialism is not satisfied merely with holding people in its grip and emptying the native's brain of all form and content. Colonialism also turns to the past of the oppressed people and distorts it, destroys it, and disfigures it. So Fanon argues that this is one of the reasons why the claims of the native intellectual who defends his culture, who defends his nation's legitimacy, are no luxury, but it's a necessity in any coherent program of decolonization. This is, I believe, one of the earliest discussions of cultural appropriation within the context of decolonization, and Fanon explains how the native intellectuals' resistance to cultural appropriation is sometimes characterized by a passionate defensiveness. And this is exactly this passionate defensiveness that we are seeing at the moment, especially in fashion media. People, when they talk about cultural appropriation, they are extremely passionate, they are angry, and they are also defensive, right? And indeed, Fanon explains how the native intellectuals' resistance to cultural appropriation is characterized by a passionate defensiveness. And then he says something which I find really interesting. He says, quote, "The passion with which native intellectuals defend the existence of their national culture may be a source of amazement, but those who condemn this exaggerated passion are strangely apt to forget that their own psyche and their own selves are conveniently sheltered behind a French or German culture which is given full proof of its existence and which is uncontested." What this means is this. Sometimes when we talk about cultural appropriation, some white European intellectuals would say things like, "Oh, please just calm down, right? Why are you freaking out like this? You know, all cultures are in interaction with each other. Of course, we should be able to get inspiration from different cultures." So they can be really complacent about this because no one is trying to appropriate white dominant culture. And this is exactly what Fanon is talking about back in 1960s. But what does cultural appropriation mean to begin with? So it's extremely difficult to define appropriation. Here I've got some definitions from the work of Susan Kaiser, who is an American scholar who wrote extensively about fashion and cultural appropriation. And she defines cultural appropriation, I think, in a very useful way. She argues that cultural appropriation involves taking elements from another culture, often without giving credit to that culture, or worse still, at the expense of that culture. And of course, in cultural studies, and in fashion in general, cultural appropriation is problematic, especially when there are power differences between different cultures. So there's often a more powerful taking culture, and that culture would dominate a less powerful culture. Having said that, cultural appropriation is a very loaded term. I think it's a very confusing term. And the distinction between appropriation and appreciation is also a very problematic distinction. Because what is the criteria, right? So how do we decide if a designer is appropriating or appreciating. One of the problems with the term cultural appropriation, so here I'm slightly provocative, right? Cultural appropriation as a term implies that a culture can be owned by a specific group of people, and then it is being appropriated by someone else. But actually, is culture an entity that can be owned by a specific group of people? That's the question I would like to ask. Because if you undertake historical research, I think you can always claim, well, not always, but sometimes you can claim that a specific object, idea, pattern, actually doesn't belong to a specific culture, but it's really a product of interactions between different cultures. So is culture something that can be owned by a specific group of people? That's the first question I would like to ask, and I think that's what makes cultural appropriation this is what makes the term cultural appropriation really problematic. And then, of course, the question of profits, and I think this is something I hope we will discuss. Who profits, right? I think that's the main issue with cultural appropriation. Now, there's another reason why the term appropriation is problematic. So I did a very simple research on Google, and I produced these maps. So what I would like to show you here is, as you can see, the debate around cultural appropriation, right? Yeah. Especially from 2016 onwards, almost sort of exploded, right? So appropriation is a very old term. I'm really sorry, by the way. Appropriation is a very old term. It is used, of course, in art history. It was used by Karl Marx in his writings. But the debate that we are having in relation to fashion and dress is actually a very recent debate. And in the last 4 or 5 years, we have been seeing this almost explosion of debates on cultural appropriation, and now, on a daily basis, we read articles on social media about cultural appropriation. So that's the first thing that I would like to know. Now, the second thing, which I find really interesting, the second map shows you the countries where this debate is most popular or most prevalent, right? And as you can see, it's Canada, United States, Australia, Sweden, and United Kingdom.
And so which one they are?
So Canada, United States, Australia, Sweden, and United Kingdom.
Right. Is they the ones that being improved?
Most of the debates relating to cultural appropriation take place in these countries.
Right. Yeah.
So the question that I would like to then ask again for further discussion is, or the comment that I would like to make, is that the debate around cultural appropriation is not only about who has the power and privilege to appropriate other cultures and make profit. It's also about who has the power and privilege to have this very debate. I don't think it's a coincidence that we are having this debate right here in the UK, in London, at this moment. Who has the power and privilege to have this very debate? In other words, what I'm trying to say, the debate around cultural appropriation sometimes can be exclusive, because most of the debate is conducted in the English language, which I find extremely problematic. But also the debate really takes place in Europe and in Northern America. So in this sense, who has the power and privilege to have this very debate? I think that's an important question. So what I am trying to do in my research, I'm trying to understand why we are having this debate now, especially in the last 5 years. Why there is this explosion of debates and discussion on cultural appropriation. If this is symptomatic of something else. I argue in my research that instead of trying to understand if something is appropriation or appreciation, which for me is an unanswerable question, we should try to understand why people talk about appropriation so much, why people react to it. And I think this maybe might show us something else. And that's what I would like to do in this short presentation. So what I do in my research in order to answer these questions, as you can see, I read hundreds of articles that were published in fashion media about cultural appropriation. I collected them. And I'm trying to understand how fashion media practitioners talk about this issue, right? And I might be wrong, but I feel, and this is my argument, and I think this may be slightly provocative. I hope it's not an annoying argument. But my argument is that at the end of the day, it is really extremely difficult to decide if something is appropriation or appreciation. What is the criterion, right? Of course, there are some cases where it is plagiarism, it's copying. And there, we can, I think, say that it's plagiarism, it's copying. But there are also loads of ambiguous cases, right, where it is not that easy to decide if a designer is engaging in appropriation or if that designer is really appreciating that culture. So I decided to take a slightly different approach in my research, and instead of trying to understand if this or that is appropriation or appreciation, I try to understand the reasons why people are so sensitive, the reasons why people talk about this issue, right? Especially fashion media practitioners, journalists. So this is what I would like to do in my research. To this end, as you can see, I've been looking at hundreds of newspaper articles, social media debates, and I've collected all these examples. And when I started, and as you can see, some of these examples are, of course, related to fashion designers and also fashion business. So when I started reading all these articles, I noticed that the way in which people talk about cultural appropriation is really characterized by a kind of passionate defensiveness, right? And this is exactly what Fanon was talking about back in 1960s. A very strong, almost rigid sense of right and wrong as to what should not be appropriated, but rather should be appreciated. Possessiveness, a sense of ownership. A really emotional, angry, impetuous, reactionary language, and overall a sense of outrage at the perceived absorption, reduction, and exploitation of one's culture by another person or an institution that has the power and privilege to do so. Let me give you really quickly some examples, some examples that I find really interesting. So, 2 years ago, the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston was accused of being insensitive. It was accused of cultural insensitivity and racism for its Kimono Wednesdays. So they were organizing an event which was called Kimono Wednesdays. Now at the event, visitors were invited to try on a replica of the kimono worn by Claude Monet's wife, Camille, in the painting La Japonaise, right? The historically accurate kimonos were made in Japan for this very purpose. So the kimonos actually were historically accurate, right? Still, activists, Asian American activists, and their supporters besieged the exhibit with signs reading, quote, "Try on the kimono, learn what it's like to be a racist," right? So this is exactly what I'm talking about. People are really angry when they talk about cultural appropriation. And I'm trying to understand the reasons where this anger comes from. And for me, the answer is obvious. People are really angry about cultural appropriation simply because of increasing violence and discrimination towards black and brown people in the United States as well as in the United Kingdom. So I argue that the debate around cultural appropriation is a very symptomatic debate. In most cases, what is appropriation or what is appreciation That's a valuable question. I'm not saying that it's a useless question, but it's really difficult to answer that question, right? So it's a very symptomatic debate. Let me give you some more examples. Recently, Katie Z apologized, had to apologize after the great-granddaughter of a Canadian Inuit shaman accused the brand of stealing his design, saying the design was copied from her great-grandfather, Aua, one of the last shaman of the Canadian Inuit. Now, in this case, I think there's no question. This is plagiarism. This is copying. There's a legal issue here to begin with, right? So this one, in a sense, is easy. Now, another example, as a Native American from the Omaha tribe in Nebraska tells us, quote, "When I see people in headdresses or Native American accessories, I feel disrespected. They don't know the meaning behind it, how we wear it, or what we do to earn it. You have to earn it in my culture. I feel powerful when I wear it, more confident and more connected to my ethnicity. I've never been embarrassed about being Native American. I take pride in it. I love how spiritual we are. It's like we're in tune with the earth and the universe. I know there is no other culture out there like mine." So there is this ownership, which I think is really important. And then, when I saw this, I really understood why we are having this debate around cultural appropriation. So going back to the question I asked at the beginning, why especially in the last decade, but especially in the last 5 years, there is almost this explosion of debates around cultural appropriation. This is the answer. So here, Amanda Sternberg is asking a really insightful, thoughtful, and moving question. What would America be like if we loved black people as much as we love black culture, right? And I think this is basically a reference to increasing state violence, racism, and discrimination against black and brown people in the United States. And I argue that this is one of the reasons why we are having this debate around cultural appropriation. So there is almost this infatuation, obsession, I would say, with culture, right? Black culture. How about black people, right? I mean, black people in the United States have to deal with police violence on a daily basis. And this is exactly what she's talking about. So, in a recently published, and this is my last example, then I will conclude. In a recently published Guardian article, in which she launches a scathing attack on the concept of cultural appropriation, Lionel Shriver tells us, quote, "This latest and little absurd no-no is part of a larger climate of supersensitivity, giving rise to proliferating prohibitions, supposedly in the interest of social justice, that constrain fiction writers and prospectively makes our work impossible." So she's extremely critical of the concept of cultural appropriation. She argues that this is censorship and this is a climate of supersensitivity. But again, I would repeat that she can be complacent about this because no one is trying to appropriate white British culture, right? And then, in response to what she wrote or what she said, Yasmin Abdelmagyet wrote this really interesting response, and she said, "There is a bigger issue here, which is emotive. Cultural appropriation is a thing because of our histories. The history of colonization, where everything was taken from the people, the world over land, wealth, dignity, and now identity is to be taken as well." So this is exactly what people are reacting to when they talk about cultural appropriation. So I would like to say that this debate won't be going anywhere, right? We will continue to have this debate, and I think it will be more and more important because I argue that actually this debate makes it possible for fashion media practitioners, but also for artisans, right? For craftspeople to rehabilitate themselves all the first, right? In the face of continuing state violence against racial minorities, in the face of continuing neoliberalism. So this passionate research for a culture, right, and this desire to protect it actually rehabilitates people, right? It's empowering, And of course, cultural appropriation in this context really works as a kind of powerful and pertinent diagnosis of how racism is now unfortunately an inseparable part of our social fabric. We are unfortunately living in racist societies. So it's not a coincidence that media critiques of cultural appropriation also refer to gentrification, how gentrification rapidly pushes people of color out of their homes, as white-owned, foodie-friendly versions of ethnic restaurants keep opening up. And of course, I was going to show one more image. I promise I'll finish now.
No, that's okay.
The lectures become sometimes really horrible with time management. I apologize. And then this, of course, again, which is not a coincidence, another media practitioner reminds us that when violence systematically targets a group of people, like Palestinian people, through genocide, slavery, and colonization, the resulting trauma lasts through generations. So when Topshop sells a festival-ready romper that mimics the Palestinian kufiyeh, no one should be surprised that a media practitioner retaliates rather passionately by saying that Topshop is ugly as hell for this. It's a kefiyeh, not a damn scarf playsuit. There's so much meaning and spilled blood behind this. So these are the reasons I think why we are having this debate. My only concern, and I'll finish with what I promise, once again, my only concern is that there's a problem with this debate, and that problem is that economy is missing from this debate. Now, what I mean by this is that when a designer appropriates another culture, for example, like Marc Jacobs, people suddenly write hundreds of articles, entries, right? Fair enough. We should be critical, and we should criticize Marc Jacobs because he's profiting from it. Having said that, not many people, unfortunately, talk about how at the moment fashion designers are being forced by an extremely cruel and oppressive industry, by the fashion industry, to produce faster and faster, right? Because of the demand. And this is one of the reasons why, unfortunately, designers haven't got much time for research. Even now, my students at the London College of Fashion keep telling me that they have got no time for research. I think that's really scary. So some of these students will be designers, and already they have to work so hard, they do unpaid internships, so they've got absolutely no time for research. And when you have no time for research, I am afraid cultural appropriation becomes unavoidable, because you are not doing proper research. So I also argue in my research that we need to look at this wider context, which is basically capitalism, right? And fashion is the dearest child of capitalism, as they say, right? So fashion industry is the dearest child of capitalism. So I think what we should do is, of course, we should be sensitive to concerns about racism, white supremacy, but I think we also need to reflect on how those long-standing historical oppressions are linked to the insane and overbearing demands of the fashion industry. And this is one of the reasons why designers, and I'm not trying to justify them at all, but I think this is one of the reasons why they keep appropriating again and again, and this is one of the reasons why we will continue to have this debate. So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So I'm gonna start a little video that Diana, she's on Skype, did for us. She's doing her PhD in Mexicana on cultural appropriation.
You can stay there.
I'm moving to your MP4, Diana. Just 1 second. And we're gonna have you for the questions as well. Do you want to say something before I started?
Yeah, just to say hi.
Uh-huh.
Thanks for the invitation to Impacto. Congratulations for putting an event like this in a very timely manner, as it was just mentioned, and also to an honor to be sharing the space with the creators that are come there, like Zunka. I've been seeing her on Mujeres de la Cooperativa, and Sociedad. Yeah,
Thank you to you. I'll play your video and then please hold with us for the questions, because I'm pretty sure people are gonna ask you something.
Thank you for having me in the round table, and also I want to thank mis compañeras de Maracate Taller Experimental, because they are a big part of my research, and without them they wouldn't be any research. So I'm mindful of the time, so let's just get straight into it. So the title of my presentation today is Beyond Inspiration and Collaboration, Shifting Who is the Designer. So to begin with, let's talk about some definitions of cultural appropriation based on, the whole roundtable. I know it's about this topic, but I wanted just to point out which are the definitions that I've been based in my research in. So based on ARIA, it's the adoption of elements from one culture by members of another culture. But she clarifies that it becomes a political act where there is a power imbalance. Similarly, Hobb talks about these power relationships, and he suggested that instead of focusing on authenticity and originality, like the origin of the pieces, it's more useful to talk about power relationships between people who were colonized in the global south and people who are economically dispossessed and marginalized. So it's about power and access. So based on Aguilar Gil in Mexico, she talks about the improper cultural appropriation, which is apropiación cultural indebida. That is a manifestation of these abuses of hegemonic culture groups towards oppressed groups. And when we talk about power relationships and access, especially access, is about accessing spaces, funds, market, legal protection, intellectual property, and economic distribution on these collaborations. Because I'm focusing here on diseño-artesanal or artisanal design as this space where artisanal indigenous artisans and what we call hegemonic designers collaborate in this space. So the hegemonic designer, normally we have Western-centered education toward market-driven approaches and mainly individually focusing in the projects. And then, on the other hand, we have indigenous artisans with their own worldviews, own ways of being and doing, and with a community orientation towards the activities that they do. So we can see kind of a clash in approaches, or so they're questioning, people are questioning these approaches from designers, asking if that would be influenced towards ideology like a modernism and modern ways of being. Because I'm based in Aotearoa in New Zealand, and I'm part of the Te Araputama, the Maori Indigenous Development faculty here, and I've been in touch with Maori creatives and scholars. So, and I'm seeing the examples that are happening here, like for example, Maori engagement in design, it's very strong here, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening. Like, so collaboration, approaching collaborations is not such an easy task. Because, for example, they are here based by government requirements, the engagement with Tangata Whenua and Maori groups and tribes. That doesn't mean that sometimes they collaborate during the process, but at the end, like, main gain goes towards, in these cases, the architecture firms that they won awards based on this, but they didn't acknowledge as much as the Maori artisan and creatives that they were working in those projects. And it's also important to notice that these classifications and these hierarchies actually put a craft under not in a good position, because the perception is that art, design, and craft, so craft goes in a lower hierarchy and based on a Western perspective. So this classification of art as a distinct from modern design is actually excluding the stories and practices of innovation and design innovation and amongst people in developing countries. And the reality is that in Mexico it's very complicated and this reality also happens in other countries, the colonization of indigenous people's knowledge, and there's a lack of reference of the cultural context of the objects, as we can see in the recent case. I was just taking without mentioning was the origin of the patterns, and then the reduction of the artisan's role into the producers of the designer's creation. So it's the artisans become only the labor towards achieving the designer's goals. And it's very challenging to distinguish the initiatives that are truly seek for an ethical and good collaborations to benefit artisans beyond only labor. And there's a lot of what is we're calling like ethical washing, like similar to greenwashing, so conveying that the practices and companies are ethical, but it's only mostly for marketing purposes. So the work that we've been doing with these compañías in Malacate y Experimental, they're artisanal collective in the highlands of Chiapas. So here, there's a movement already since happening mostly 2016 that it's about decolonizing design, and there's scholars and from different parts of the world. They created this platform like with a critique about mainstream design discourses in global platforms that mostly gave a focus around Anglo-centric and Eurocentric practices of design and doing and being in the world, comparing to, for example, what Boaventura Santos de Sousa talks about, the epistemologies of the South that are concerned with the production and validation of these other knowledges that are actually part of other cultures that they've been existent and resistant all this oppression. So we talk about other designs, like other ways of designing, and accepting that not all the design goes towards this Western perspective of what is design. So aligned with the epistemologies of the South, we're talking about buen vivir, like good living, that is part of this revisibilization of indigenous cultures in America, in our continent, in Abya Yala. So it comes from indigenous people movements, and it's not only fighting for indigenous people's rights, but the emancipation of human beings. Because it comes it's the individual imbalance with the environment and the context, cultural context as well. And there's other initiatives from other scholars in the South, like Design for the Pluribus from Escobar, and Design for the South, or Design Other by Gutierrez Borrero. So part of the research, we were exploring this concept of sentir pensar, or sensing thinking. It's been translated as sensing thinking, the importance of the balance between what you think and feeling, not only detached from emotion, and also the interculturality, because there are many groups that we collaborate and work together in these spaces. And then I've been learning also from Malacate how they consider the designs and patterns from their textiles and the pieces they sell as part of indigenous cultural rights as established by UNESCO. And then also how not only them but many initiatives operate on social media, and they share not only the products but the stories and the context and the cultural background of the pieces. And for example, been learning how they approach design of based on traditional patterns or pieces that they already have, and how the symbols they transform it into different type of products for garments, and also how they rescue patterns and motifs and techniques that they were almost gone, and they are introducing them themselves again in new pieces. And also been learning about Lequilhuxlejal, which is a personified life for Buen Vivir from the highlands of Chiapas. Otan, how to be heart-led, based on the Mayan culture, past and present. And then they talk about innovation as resistant, as shown in the rescuing of these pieces. And I have been having conversation with other designers as well, that they've been trained similar like me from different fields like textile and industrial design and graphic design, when we engage with people, we just realize, like for example, I've been talking with this Adriana Flores, and she was saying that the communities taught me other ways of seeing, feeling, and doing design. So we are acknowledging that the ways that we are educated in design are different from the community. So it's something that we need to start rethinking how we educate future designers. And again, colabar, gracias, and thank you very much for your invitation. And there's my contact, so I will be happy to continue the conversation. Thank you.
Gracias, Diana. And she's still here on Skype, but she did a little video so that we didn't have any trouble. Thank you so much. I'll keep you here. We're gonna move into the Impacto presentation, which is also quite succinct. Well, I just want to say thank you as well for the idea, Violeta. This is an amazing opportunity to promote Mexico and the collaborations with designers and artisans, and we really think that we can make it in an ethical way, counting all the value chain that it involves, and it's quite difficult, but we're happy to do it in the Western world so that we came with a voice with the artisans. I want to thank Shunka and Maria for being around. Shunka has a cooperative in Sinacantan, and they're amazing in terms of design. In fact, this is their own design, what I'm wearing today. That's another dress that we designed with them, and that's the dress that they use in a daily basis. So we're trying to use the techniques to make this amazing fashion, but it's very much in an exchange of knowledge. And then also thank you, Andrea. Andrea was a collaborator at Impacto. Now she has her own design brand. Andrea Velasco, she's earned nice prizes on design in Mexico, and it's another way of seeing it. It's here. And finally, Hilando Historias, who was also very involved in the event, Ivone. So we're here, and we thank you everybody to be present in this round table. So I explained very briefly, our focus is on innovation. We're an NGO, so the innovation comes from a social perspective. It's more on the philanthropy side. But what we want to do is to really work on the development integrally from the women we participate with, we collaborate with. And we focus very much on practices that have to do with the value chain, with the production of products, which means innovating in design as well as in materials. but also really bringing things in which the people can be happy, the women can be happier. So we give them tools for empowering themselves and being better women, so that they can also have better enterprises as well. So our focus is very much on social enterprises. We have around 800 women in the highlands of Chiapas. They are all Central background, Maya communities. The south of Mexico, which is Chiapas next to the Guatemala border, is one of the most vulnerable states in Mexico in terms of poverty indexes. So for me, being Mexican is really important to be part of this system in which we come up with practices that make us a better living, a well-being, and how they say un buen vivir. And then it's also important for us to support social enterprises as well. So anyone that has to be with young girls or young designers, this is something that we want to put a lot of emphasis, and that's why we are supporting this event with very young Mexican designers, with cooperatives like Mujeres Sembrando la Vida, and also with somebody that is doing her master degree here, and in any ways to push this entrepreneurial approach, and if it's women, even better. And that's what we're trying to do. So basically we do woman artisan integral development with a lot of focus on the human side as well as the productive and commercialization side. We drive social enterprises as much as possible. And then finally, we try to get some influence in public policy. We're trying to put some ideas in terms of collective intellectual rights, which is quite difficult, but we have been doing a lot of social media, and we've been pushing the government. I guess today we're in a great space because the government is willing to do something different in Mexico. So together with the social society, the civil society, we're able to bring these topics more visible and hopefully do something that can work for the world as well, in terms of being more fair and equal in all instances. And the other part of our initiatives has to do precisely with the social media that I was telling you about. There is a social media campaign, ethical campaign, that is called Viernes Tradicional. We just try to replicate the Casual Friday, but we came up with this idea that every Friday people will put a selfie on social media because young people likes doing that. But we always put a lot of emphasis on which is the garment we're using. Obviously, it has to do with something traditional and who made it. So for us, it's very important to give credit to the person that made it and with which technique, how much it takes. And when we also have a few other things that do revalorization of those techniques, as well as visibility of the women that are doing these handicrafts, so that we can reach the consumer much easier. And then finally, in that social media space, we have a blog, and we've been working a lot in terms of our record of cultural appropriation for textiles in Mexico. That is quite known right now. So this is how it looks, the blog, and we have a map, and we've been registering all the different cases of textile appropriation. And because today we really want to focus more on one case in one case in Chiapas, precisely with Maria of Aguacatenango. We're going to only be talking about Aguacatenango, and it's not going to be me telling the story, but we're going to pass the word and the voice to the artisan. And that's why Maria is here. So I'm going to just stop here, and I'm passing the voice to Maria, and she can explain a little bit of what she has been living in terms of these appropriation cases, which there's 3 cases from Sara. This is the first one. It's exactly the same. They have this blouse in white. The second case was that one there. This is a picture that we took in the community, and that's the picture of Sara in their publicity, in their marketing. And this is the third one, which happened recently. For example, this is sold around 800 pesos, so say around $80 US. and we see that they always sell it for less during their sale periods. But that's the last one. And there's like also a UK brand Starmela, who pick up exactly the same pattern, the same colors, but it's made in India. These ones, I guess, they are pretty much all made in Asia, okay? So what we think is a double exploitation, because it's exploited on our side, but also on the side of the industries in Asia and India as well. And this is a little bus that we made with our heritage layer. We touch base with a Mexican media channel that is quite known, and it's Animal Politico. So we explain the situation of the second case, Sara, and we were able to pick up the interest of the economists here in the UK. So the economists did a deep analysis of what was happening. They came over, and in fact Maria was there to explain the situation. And we have few other channels like Deutsche Welle in Spanish, and El Diario.es, which is in Spain. Of all these different media that went all over the world, we never can get any answer from Sarah or Independence. There was no answer whatsoever. At this time, the government was not really doing much because it was the last government in Mexico. Today, the case that Carolina Herrera happened just recently, and the Ministry of Culture as well as the National Institute of Original Peoples have already sent letters. So it's a good time to speak about these things, and the purpose of the whole exhibition and the roundtable is about really making things that are good for everybody and make things more equal in the world. So I forgot that I was going to explain the media situation. I'll pass the word now to Maria. Sorry about that.
Are you translating, Adriana?
Ajá, sí, tú empiezas a hablar y yo traduzco.
Buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos y gracias por visitarnos, gracias por estar aquí esta tarde. Mi nombre es María Mendez Rodríguez, yo soy de una comunidad que se llama Aguacatenango, Chiapas, es municipio de Carranza. Y pues antes agradecerles que nos dan o me dieron esta oportunidad de llegar hasta acá. La verdad es la primera vez, nunca había yo salido de mi comunidad, pero gracias a esta organización Impacto que sí me dio la oportunidad de estar aquí para hablar un poco de nuestros bordados. ¿Sí?
So her name is María Mendez Rodríguez. She comes from the community in Chiapas, Aguacatenango. And first of all, she wants to thank everybody to be present and take a look about the textiles of the community. But also she wants to thank our organization as well as to have the opportunity to come out here to London, because it's the first time she's out of her community. She's been out in San Cristobal and Tuxtla, which are two cities close to Aguacatenango, but it's the first time she's going out, first Cancun and then London.
Sí, en esta hora, pues en esta tarde yo estoy aquí para que ustedes conozcan, o las personas, más se puede decir de todo el mundo, de dónde venimos y a qué nos dedicamos. Igual lo que estábamos viendo hace ratito sobre estos bordados, la verdad estos bordados son de nosotros, es de una comunidad, es de mi comunidad, sí. Y sí me da gusto que ustedes estén aquí, que las personas nos vean y que ellos entiendan o se den cuenta de dónde vienen estos bordados y por qué la gente hace sus bordados, la gente de mi comunidad, y que personas como ustedes tomen conciencia que estos bordados dependen mucho de nuestra cultura, de nuestro diario vivir.
Well, she says that she wants to take the opportunity today to really tell everybody from this culture, like Western world, that this embroidery is from their community and not from Sarah, no? That it's definitely from theirs, that they embroider in their community on a daily basis, and then it's also part of their culture.
Sí, bueno, la intención no es de que nosotros queramos dañar a otras personas o a otras marcas. Eso no es nuestra intención. Al final de cuentas, mi comunidad no sabe de esto. Muchas personas no saben de esto.
She also mentioned before that she wants everybody to have conscience, but then at the same time she doesn't want to hurt anybody or any brand. And even many people within the community doesn't even know that it's been like a case of cultural appropriation. But that she really just wants to put it out there and people to make conscious.
Así es, mi comunidad no sabe de esto, la misma gente no se ha dado cuenta de qué es lo que nos están haciendo. Y entonces, pero sí nos está afectando bastante.
So people don't really know that like a big brand is taking over the embroidery or the patterns, the designs, but that there's a direct effect of what is happening while a company doing this.
Bueno, les digo de qué manera nos afecta a nosotros como artesanos o como comunidad, porque estos bordados son lo tradicional de allá. Y pues en cada bordado, en cada flor, en cada figura que se mete, pues es el pensamiento de una artesana. Es lo que viene en el pensamiento de una artesana que día con día está bordando.
So every single pattern, say a flower, like a leaf, anything, it's basically the thinking and the motions of the artisan that is doing it, and obviously it also represents the cultural visions of the peoples.
Sí, entonces sí nos afecta por lo que la artesana o la persona que empieza a diseñar. Igual estas flores, lo más tradicional de mi comunidad son las flores de margaritas. Le llamamos flores de margaritas y sus ramas. ¿Por qué es lo más tradicional de ahí? Porque me ha contado mi mamá que había un huerto allá que lo que cultivaban son flores de margarita.
So the most traditional one is the daisy flower, and then it's been many years in the past in which they used to cultivate the daisy flowers, and they pick up these flowers, and it's part of their day-to-day embroidery.
Sí, así es. Entonces, eso es lo tradicional de ahí. Y entonces y por eso, la verdad sí nos sentimos mal porque nosotros, si nos lleva tantas horas, tanto tiempo para bordar una rosa o una rama, y viene una máquina que lo hace en pocos minutos, claro que la máquina va a cobrar menos tiempo y nosotros es más tiempo. Y lo más triste es que la gente no se da cuenta que la máquina rápido lo hace. En cambio, una persona, una artesana, es un esfuerzo que se usa la vista, que se cansa el cuerpo, pero aún así estamos ahí. Pero sí quisiéramos que se dieran cuenta, que la gente pues tomara conciencia de eso.
So she's talking that the embroidery done in a machine or in an industrial fashion will take nothing and basically doesn't take any time, whereas the handicraft work will take hours, as well as the size, the body, the effort, and it's part of the daily life. So it's definitely something that she wants people to be aware.
Sí, así es. Entonces, bueno, igual Por mi parte, yo no me siento mal de que tal vez haya diseñadores, como hace rato estaba comentando Adriana, si hay diseñadores y que juntos trabajemos, que esos diseñadores quieran trabajar con nosotros, pero también que se nos respete y que no solo es de ir a sacar un trabajo y después venir a copiarlo y ya, y que nosotros nos dejen en cuenta. Y bueno, a mi forma de pensar, yo estoy aquí, así como les decía yo, es por esta organización.
So that she doesn't have a problem with designers collaborating and sharing knowledge, but she does have a problem if there is no respect.
But it's quite extraordinary. I mean, they have to have some kind of, I'm surprised that they don't have the Mexican culture in art are not protecting them. Because I come, like today, I see this marvelous, and then I can take the picture and then design it here in a different kind of colors and different kind of thing, and claim that I have done it. So what kind of protection do they have? None.
I don't think so, but we can definitely open the questions. I think I'd rather ask Maria the question as well. But let me just finish her time, and we'll open it.
Yeah.
And I will let you know what I think myself. ¿Qué más querías decirnos, María?
Sí, bueno, también yo de mi forma de pensar, yo quisiera yo que igual como esta organización, ellos han llegado hasta nuestra casa, ellos conocen cada compañera que trabaja, hasta han llegado más al fondo. Por ejemplo, yo vengo representando un grupo de 43 mujeres que nos juntamos en mi casa, pero esas personas que nos llegan a visitar en mi casa se han dado el tiempo de llegar a la casa realmente de la artesana y han visto realmente cómo es el vivir de esa artesana, que no vive en lujos, aunque esté trabajando cada minuto, cada hora, aprovecha al máximo de su tiempo, pero por lo mismo que no nos valoran, pues seguimos en lo mismo.
She's saying that she appreciates the fact that our NGO goes to their homes and we are in their lives in an ongoing basis, like evaluating the context and seeing the challenges of their work in a daily basis, and there's a respect, and that's what she thinks it has to happen that way, because they don't live in a luxury fashion, but they just want to be living better. And whomever comes in regards to collaborate or to work together, there should be that kind of deep relationships.
Así es. Entonces, estoy aquí pues para pedirles de favor que tomen conciencia como personas adultas, como jóvenes que vienen creciendo y tal vez tienen un proyecto. Nosotros estamos dispuestos a trabajar juntos, pero también que nos respeten, que valoren nuestro trabajo. Y bueno, yo, igual como ustedes consumidores que tal vez les gusta pues ponerse una de nuestras prendas, ustedes pueden preguntar de qué tela está hecho, de qué hilo está hecho, y yo creo que ahí se van a dar cuenta quién es el que hace esa prenda.
So she wants us to be respectful, give the message about being conscious and being respectful, more so with the people who are coming in a day-to-day basis in this exhibition, and also more so the young people. But she wants also consumers to ask and to take a look about the threads and the fabrics and how the garment is being built, and really being conscious about who made that code. And that's what she wanted to portray in terms of message during these 7 days. Muchas gracias.